Hi guys, welcome back to another tutorial video in the Unity series. Last week we took a look at collision systems and how we can use them to destroy game objects. This week we're going to be taking a look at particle systems and how we can use both the instantiate method and the get component method in order to make our destroyed game objects look more lifelike. Now the first thing to do is open up our bullet move script, which is attached to the prefab of the bullet. This will open up in Visual Studio, and you can see within here all the components we included in the last session, which includes the onCollisionEnter method. Now within this onCollisionEnter method, we are detecting a collision that occurs between the object which the script is attached to, i.e. the bullet, and the collider of the other object within the scene. Now that collider within the other object is declared as a variable of type collision. So we can use that within our if statements that we included to detect what tag is attached to them. So we can execute some additional code. And in this instance, we destroyed the collision.game object. So that was destroyed the barrel. Now what we want to do today is include a particle effect system. This particle effect system will likely be an explosion given it's a barrel. However, in future tutorial sessions, we're going to take a look at target health. So it's unlikely, of course, that in the real world that a barrel will explode instantly on a single bullet impact, but that's for a later tutorial video. Now we're going to be using the instantiate function, which we've used in a previous video in order to create and replicate the bullet prefab. In this instance, of course, we're going to be instantiating a particle system when the collision between the bullet and the barrel occurs. And as with all instantiate functions, we need to make sure we can reference a game object to instantiate. So the first thing we're going to do is create a public variable of type game object. Now this public variable, of course, will be visible within the inspector, so we can drag and drop our prefab that we want to use in the inspector, and we're going to give it a suitable name of explosion effect and end the line off with a semicolon. Now if we click save and go back into Unity, we can quite easily see now that the public variable is now visible with the inspector on the bullet move script on the prefab of the bullet. Now all we need to do here now is drag and drop a prefab particle system into this variable for use within the code. So we're going to find a particle effect system. I'm going to use one within the effect examples asset that I've downloaded from the asset store. However, you may use any other prefab of a particle system that you wish within the asset store. I'm going to use one under the fire explosion effects called Big Explosion, and all I'm going to do here is drag and drop that into the explosion effect variable. Now as soon as we've done that, of course it won't actually do anything at the moment until we instantiate this object within our scene. So we're going to go back to Visual Studio, and we're going to be calling an instantiate function within the if statement of the detecting the collision between the bullet and the barrel tag. Now the first thing we want to do, of course, is open up the instantiate function. So we're going to do instantiate, and we're going to open up a set of brackets. And the first thing we want to do within the brackets is call the object that we want to instantiate, and that's going to be the explosion effect. Now we want the explosion effect to occur at the barrel's position and not the bullet's position. So we want to call the collision of type transform dot position, and we also want to do the collisions, which is of course just in reference to the collision is the variable of type collision that we put the collision data into when an object collides with it. And we're going to do the dot transform again dot rotation, and we're going to end the line off with a semicolon. There we go, and click save. Now if we go back into Unity now and we just give it a second to update and click play, we should now be able to see when the object collides with the barrel, it'll instantiate an explosion effect. Now this of course isn't making use of the particle system itself. or referencing the particle system itself. Instead, this is simply using an instantiate function that we've used previously. Um, we can, of course, use this instantiate function in all matter of situations. For example, if I wanted to destroy the crate and instantiate a cracked version of the crate once it's been destroyed, I can do so. However, we're now going to take a look at how we can use the component particle system itself within our game, and we're going to be doing this in the form of a muzzle flash effect for our weapon, because obviously at the moment you can see that when we left click, so when we're checking the input of the user on the left click, all we can see there is a bullet prefab occur, and it doesn't give it a sense of realism that we're actually shooting the weapon. Now, this muzzle flash effect is likely going to be a persistent particle system within our game, i.e. it's always going to be moving around with a player, and it's always going to be playing every time the user clicks the left mouse button. Now, we don't want to instantiate or use the instantiate function every time the user left clicks the mouse button for this muzzle flash effect to play. The reason for that, of course, is it affects performance, because every single time we instantiate something, we add a clone into the game. So instead, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the particle effect system as a game object that is currently in our scene and asking it to play every time the left mouse button is clicked. Now, of course, the first thing we want to do is find the muzzle flash effect. There is one within the effect examples assets, which of course is the Unity particle pack that can be downloaded from the asset store. And this muzzle flash effect is fairly realistic, so we're going to be using this one. And all we're going to have to do is drag and drop this muzzle flash effect into our scene as a child object of the bullet spawn that we created in a previous session. Now, the reason why we want it, of course, on the bullet spawn is because it is inherently a child object of the gun, and it's already in the correct location, i.e. at the end of the barrel. Now, this will always, therefore, move with the player, so it's never going to be out of rotation or out of position. The first thing we want to do when this is in the scene is ensure that the muzzle flash effect is resetted to the correct position of the bullet spawn. So we left click the muzzle flash effect, we click the cog on the transform window, and we reset its position. So you can see there, if we go back to our scene view, that the muzzle flash effect is now right at the end of the barrel. Now, to test if the particle system is in the right position, we can click the Simulate button on the particle effect window within the scene view, and this will display or render the particle system every time we click it. Now, if you look over into the game window, this will give you a good idea of whereabouts it's going to occur, which may indicate that you need to move it away from the gun or move it closer to the gun. It depends purely on where your bullet spawn location is. Now you can see on the muzzle flash effect game object that we also have a particle system component attached to it. Now this particle system inherently comes with a number of attributes relating to particle systems. That includes duration, whether or not it's looping, whether or not there's a start delay, etc. We don't have time in this video, of course, to discuss all the attributes in relation to particle systems. That'll be for a future video. However, this is the way in which you're going to be creating your own particle systems in the future. Now, the main attribute within this particle system component that we need to direct to is the play on awake checkbox. Now, if this is ticked, which it will be inherently ticked once you put the object into the game scene, it will mean it will play every time the game loads. Now, we don't want that to load as soon as the game starts to play. We only want it to load when the left mouse button is clicked. So we're going to have to deselect this tick box, and then we can start to look at how we can make it play within our code. Now the code in which we want to play the particle system on is the one in which we check for the user input, i.e. the left mouse button, in order to instantiate the prefab of the bullet. Now I've called mine gun. You may have called yours something different. However, we need to open this up in Visual Studio, and we can see here we have the void update method, which checks for user input. We should always use a void update method for checking user input. And we can see there the if statement that we included in a previous session to check the get mouse button down 0, which is the left mouse button, and our instantiation of the prefab of the bullet at the shot spawns position. Now, every time we want to left click the mouse button, we also want to play the particle system. In order to do this, we need to get a reference first to the particle system. Now, there's two ways in which we can do this. We can either create a new public variable, so we can drag and drop the particle system that we have in our scene view into this, and this public variable is going to be of type particle system. Not a game object, because we are directly interacting with the particle system. We want to use its play on awake or play method. So we can do it this way, or we can get the component itself within the child object. Now, in order to do this, we need to create a new variable still. In this instance, we can create the variable within the update function, or rather the start method. So we can have that object have access to the particle system every single time that the game plays. Now, in order to do this, we can do a particle system, or declare particle system straight away. Give it a variable name of PS, perhaps, and we're going to make it equal to get component of type particle system. And we're going to end the line with an open curly bracket and a semicolon. Now, this will only happen, so this will only allow you access to the particle system component if it is on the object that this script is on. So at the moment, of course, this gun script that instantiates a bullet and checks for user input is actually on the AK-47, i.e. the gun. Now, the muzzle flash effect is actually an object in its own right as a child object of the gun. So in this situation, of course, this will not be able to have access to the particle system. So instead, what we need to do is we need to get the components within its child object. So get component in children. Now, this will find the particle system inside any child object of the gun object. Now, this could be useful in situations where you've only got one particle system as a child object of the gun or of any other object. However, it's likely you're going to have multiple particle systems at some point on a particular object, so this wouldn't work. It's going to find all the particle systems of the object. So it's likely we're not going to be using this method. It's probably easier to use the public declaration of type particle system. Give it a variable name, so we're just going to call it PS, and that way we can just drag and drop the individual particle system we want to play into the inspector. Now, once we've declared the variable, we need to go into our if statement, and the only line we need to include is PS, which is referring to the variable that we've created of the particle system, and we're going to call play. And we're going to end, because it is a function, we're going to end it off with open curly brackets and a semicolon. Now we've clicked save and go into Unity. We can see now on our gun script, give it a second to update, that we should now have a particle system, a variable named PS, where we can drag and drop the flash effect, the muzzle flash effect prefab that we want to use into the variable inspector. So we're going to do that now. Drag and drop the muzzle flash effect in. Remember, it's got to be the muzzle flash effect that's inside the hierarchy, i.e. the one that's in the scene view. If you drag and drop the prefab from the project list, i.e. your assets, it won't work because this prefab technically is not inside your game. Now, as soon as you've done that, click play, and you can now see every single time we left click the button, the left mouse button, it now plays the muzzle flash effect. Now, the two methods we've looked at today, the instantiate method and directly interacting with the particle system component on an object, can be applied to many different situations within our game. So for example, if, as I've stated previously, if I wanted a particle system to play when I hit the crates, I can do so following the same instantiate method that we've just done. Same with the barrel, if I wanted a fire effect to occur on the floor after it's been exploded, then I can do so following the same instantiate method. So we go back into our bullet move script, we create a new public game object variable, and then we just call an instantiate function with reference to the new variable, and we drag and drop the prefab of the fire effect into the inspector. Same with the play method as well. If we had multiple particle systems as a child object of a gun or even on the gun, then we can drag and drop, create a new variable, drag and drop these particle systems into the variables and play them when the mouse button is down. That's it for today's video, guys. If you want to continue your practice on instantiation and the particle system play function, do so using different objects within your scene. Alternatively, of course, you can go to the Unity 3D website, the scripting library, as well as the tutorials on there for additional guidance on the particle system component and the instantiate method. Next week, we're going to be taking a look at how we can incorporate target systems into our objects, i.e. give them health and add some force to them once they're hit, which should allow us to create a more dynamic feeling environment and one that's more realistic to the genre that we're trying to aim for.